Welcome to the TEDxPlattsburgh new podcast series. I'm Stéphane Bilodeau, accompanied by my colleague and friend, Dr. Aïssé Pazak-Sina. Welcome, Aïssé.
Thank you,
Today,
Stefan.
thank you. We have an incredible guest to exchange with, a leader and a woman who has already achieved so much in Scotland, in UK, and beyond. Maggie Wright, Chief Executive Officer, Families in Trauma and Recovery in the UK. So Aïssé, please introduce our guest speaker.
With pleasure. Maggie Wright is a mother who found herself facing trauma in her own family and struggled to find the correct support that was needed at the time. Although fortunate in the UK to have an NHS, it is not always available at the exact point it is required due to the long waiting lists, and sometimes families are facing critical life and death situations. So there had to be another solution. But what is it? Maggie knew that she had been supported by others with lived experience, so decided to set up families in trauma and recovery based on real values, lived experience, and peer support. Once we realize that often the solutions have to come from within ourselves, it's the turning point, isn't it? No longer do we hand our power over to the others to find our solutions, we find them within our own communities and by connecting with each other. There will always be a need for clinical support, definitely, but by the same token, there will always be a need for peer support too, which will strengthen communities from.
I can add that Maggie is passionate for and about, I should say, digital care and digital health, but also creating real and meaningful changes. And it is clear in family in trauma and recovery, using powerful emotional CPR and evidence-based digital service to support individuals and families. So if I may, Maggie, we'll listen to you. You are a remarkable and generous leader, and we'll listen to you today. So let's start with some questions for you. And Aïssé, I will let you begin with the very first question.
Thank you, Stefan. So, Maggie, how having a purpose, maybe a childhood dream or experience, plays a role at your success?
That's an interesting one. My purpose was always to stand up for anyone who was oppressed, but especially women and children in any type of abusive situation. Now, I suppose this came from my own mother's experience in watching how strong that she had to be able to bring up her 6 children in a really challenging and traumatic environment. And I was really left in awe of the strength that that took. And I used to think if you could actually bottle the strength that women like my mother had, what a power it would actually be. And so I suppose my own purpose then was to always support people who were oppressed, because we were in a family where we needed that. We actually needed that support. And it was a lifeline if somebody came along and just helped you in one tiny little way to get through one day at a time.
Great answer. And I might add that you also have a really impressive entrepreneurial journey related to that. So could you please tell us a bit about this purposeful entrepreneurial journey?
Yes, it was quite interesting because obviously I was brought up in a bit of a traumatic domestic abuse situation. I had a wonderful marriage and 2 children, 2 girls, but our daughters actually suffered a really traumatic incident in our lives over 10 years ago. And it really shook the whole family, my husband and myself. And I was quite shocked that there wasn't really any support for us, and horrified to learn that many families have to go through this and they have no one to turn to. And it could be through lack of services, as it is sometimes in the UK, perhaps even fear and stigma and discrimination. Perhaps there's not enough doctors and counsellors, which is the case in the UK here. But what was interesting was a few of my friends who had had a similar experience. There wasn't many of them had gone through exactly the same thing, but a few of them had similar lived experience, and they became my lifelines. And they were a bit further on in their journey, but they were able to share some of their journey to actually help me. So I looked at that and thought, this lived experience that we have, why are we not tapping into this? Why are we not using this to be able to help each other in our own communities? You know, we don't have to have a clinical title to be able to help someone else. You know, we don't need a professional qualification to actually care about another human being. So why are we not tapping into this valuable resource of lived experience? And as I've said at the beginning, you know, doctors and counsellors, there's queues there and they can't do it all. And sometimes when you need the support, you know, if you have to wait in a queue, then you need the support there and then. So I decided to set up Families in Trauma and Recovery and created this kind of safe framework to train peer workers and show that trauma can be overcome. It is a journey, no doubt. You know, it's not possible to say it's not easy, but there is a huge amount of post-traumatic growth that can actually come after we've managed to get through some of these situations. And in fact, my organisation here is the result of post-traumatic growth, you know, because I just knew that there had to be something there. When those doctors and counsellors weren't there, there had to be something else in place. Otherwise, we are facing people with life and death situations. And that to me was completely unacceptable.
Thank you, Maggie, for sharing that. And I'm sorry to hear that you had such a traumatic experience, but it is impressive that how you turned such a traumatic experience to a beautiful gift for others. So I'm curious to hear how resilient or growth mindset has played a role in your success journey so far.
Yeah, it was interesting, that question, Aisha, because this growth mindset that we speak about and resilience, when you're going through trauma, you don't actually think about the fact that you have a growth mindset or that you are resilient. In fact, if I was really honest, I would say, if somebody said that to me at the beginning, I would say, no, I don't have a growth mindset and I don't have resilience, because at that moment in trauma, I felt like my whole world had shattered. However, and this is why our organisation started off by being named Families in Trauma, because that's where I was at that moment in time. But as I got further down my journey, I actually realised it's a recovery journey. You actually don't have to stay in exactly the same place. It might be a number of years that you're actually dealing with that trauma, but my journey was not just about the trauma. It was about the recovery and the growth. And so that really was the key. So our business name then changed just in the last couple of years to Families in Trauma and Recovery. And the recovery is more important than the actual trauma in the first place. So it was quite a journey for me to go from that. I didn't set out thinking I'm this wonderful, resilient person. I have all this growth mindset, but it did happen little by little, one step at a time. So I think, you know, it is a journey for anyone in that situation.
Yes, and recovery is definitely a key and crucial thing. And by the way, why do you see empowering or to empower women and girls, especially who are living or have lived through traumatizing family environment or even other similar things? Why do you see this important and crucial from your standpoint? So you have a really personal experience, but also you've seen so many others going through that. So
Yeah.
mhm.
I mean, I am just so passionate about the power that women and girls actually have. And quite often they don't even know they've got it. They don't realize it until you are able to start working with them. And it is such a beautiful transformation and we only work with them for a few weeks. and they start looking inwards and they start realizing this is a self-development journey, and they're starting to recognize things about themselves. And that's what we want. We don't think that we are the people that can just give that strength to them. What we're trying to do is help them to identify that the strength is actually inside themselves. And when they tap into that, boy, what a power it actually releases, because then they can go on to do so many more great things and support each other, because women have a natural kind of tendency to want to nurture and to look after people. And we see that so often. So if we can just tap into that when they've maybe been traumatized or they've had really difficult things to go through, we have people on our course right now, and they said to us, we believed we were broken and we would never recover and we would never get to that time. And we've worked with them for 8 weeks, for instance, and they've said, I can't believe it, it's changed my life completely. Now I realize I've got the power within myself. And that really, for me, that's the key, is once they get that, there's no holding them back. We hardly need to do anything else, because the power is actually there inside themselves. And it's beautiful to see it released. We have better communities when we actually empower other people, rather than taking their power away and saying, we're going to fix everything for you. They have power within themselves. They just need to learn to recognize it.
Awesome message, by the way. Great answer, Maggie. Aisha, I think you have other questions.
Yeah. That's a great message, yeah, and I totally agree. When women start to believe in themselves and tap into their brilliance or power, everything changes in the positive direction. So, in regards to that, what will be your suggestions for a woman living in a traumatizing family environment? Maybe describing first what traumatizing environment is likely to be and how all this starts.
Yeah. What's really interesting when we talk about trauma with anyone, it's actually a subjective term, because what might be trauma to you is not trauma to another person. So we often think about, situations like domestic violence, sexual abuse, addiction, all these things are obviously very traumatic. But some people do actually come through this and it hasn't actually traumatized them, whereas a lot of other people do. So trauma, first of all, is a subjective term. And we need to remember that and be careful that we don't also be judging other people and say, that's not very traumatizing. I would manage to get through that. If something is a trauma to you, you will know because of the effects that it's actually having on you. So you need to trust your own analysis of what's going on there physically, emotionally, and mentally. Obviously, traumatizing family environments can be huge events, a bit like we spoke about the earthquake in Turkey, for instance, but equally many living in domestic and sexually abusive relationships for years, enduring addictions and violence and untold trauma. That is actually really difficult for them, just as difficult as if they had been in the earthquake. And sometimes, obviously, they've got the two things together. So it can start really subtly, where people, they're in relationships and they struggle to get out of them, and then they become more dependent on the other person. And once you have children, you can become, that's your priority. So you can be trapped in these situations. So there's a lot of different ways that trauma can actually occur, but it's remembering that it's a subjective term. And we will know ourselves. And if we feel we need that support, then we need to look for that. And, other people, they will deal with their situations, but we have to try and deal with our own and our family first, and then we can actually help other people.
Great, important point you're coming with. And by the way, you opened quickly on other types of traumatism, like the Turkey earthquake. So there has been many massive tragedies in the last few months. The earthquake definitely in Turkey, but also wars in Ukraine,
right.
in Sudan. Just today, there is a super typhoon category 5 going towards Philippines. So these are kind of the other sources of trauma, definitely.
Yep.
And all those things are affecting women and girls even more for so many reasons. Not necessarily good reason, but definitely affecting more women and girls. So what will be your advice in such a, I would call that an external traumatism, something that caused this trauma from the environment or external causes like the wars and stuff like that? What would be your advice for them to stand up and in an environment where they have absolutely no choice but to continue to live in this
Yeah.
really tough environment? A tough question, by the way. Sorry for that, but
It is a tough question, but I had to think about this one. And
Mhm.
the first thing that I would actually say to people who have to be in these situations is, rather than thinking externally of, what are the solutions, it's about, first of all, be gentle on yourself and don't demand too much of yourself when you have gone through these situations. Sometimes our minds want to race ahead and come up with all these solutions. And yet, when we've gone through trauma, we've got to sit with it, learn how it's affected us, learn how it's actually affected our whole family. And, losing loved ones, houses, and jobs, etc., they're really traumatic events, and we cannot expect someone to recover instantly from that. So we have to be realistic as to how much we can cope with for now. So don't expect to do everything at once. It's probably better if we can actually do small things more regularly, and that can create large change, rather than trying to do large change when we don't have the resources that we can actually do that. So there will be lots of huge things that need to be changed, but it can only be done slowly and bit by bit. So if we keep our expectations realistic, then we learn to build hope and belief in our abilities to recover. I often think this is like, I do dressmaking. I actually love to do dressmaking. And somebody gave me this as an illustration once, that what holds a garment together, if you do tacking stitches, which are the big stitches, the garment isn't strong, and it could pull apart quite easily because you've only got the big tacking stitches in it. Soon as you do the tiny little stitches, or you put it on the machine and you really stitch that together, and they're tiny, tiny little stitches, then you have a strong garment. And for me, that's how I relate our life, is that, it's all these tiny, tiny little steps. And it's better to focus on them than focus on the huge things. Because when we focus on the huge, quite often we're overwhelmed and we can't cope because it's too much for us to try to do all at once. So try to find something that's realistic and tangible that we can do on a daily basis. Get that going first, then add a little thing to it, another little thing, and eventually that strength will actually come back into the person's life.
Great example. So tiny stitch that helps making a strong garment. So really great example. Anyway, step by step, bit by bit.
Yeah.
That's great advice. Thanks, Maggie. So I see. I think you have another question still.
Yeah, I have another question. Last from my side. Actually, Maggie touched on this, but I would like to have a specific focus on this because I think this is very important. What will be your advice, Maggie, for women to stand up if they have lost their beloved ones, and also job is a multidimensional trauma?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think the answer is to connect and talk to others who've gone through similar situations. You'll learn so much from their lived experience. And one of the things I would say is, do not ever feel shamed into silence. Never feel that there's something wrong with you. It's actually what happened to you. Now, that changes the dynamics about how we move forward and how we have hope. Because if it's something that's happened to us, we can actually do something about that. And quite often, a lot of these trauma situations are external events that have really, really impacted us internally. But there is a way through that, and never be shamed into not speaking about your experiences, because the power is actually in sharing those experiences, because that's what helped me at the end of the day. It was, you then didn't feel alone. You felt there was somebody else. You didn't feel like you were completely strange and different than everybody else, because you were talking to other people who'd gone through it. You learned from their experience. And yes, if there's a chance to have clinicians and doctors involved, fine. But most of the time there isn't. But the lived experience and connecting with other people is so, so valuable. And it helps you to create a little life for yourself because you learn from each other. You learn, how have you managed this? How have you done that? And women naturally like to speak like this anyway. So it's a great opportunity to just, once someone has the courage to connect and open up and say, this is my experience, you will often find the whole floodgates open and everybody joins in. And all of a sudden, you've created a lovely little community that can support each other. And that's where the strength lies. The strength lies in that connecting, because once we're disconnected, we are alone and we feel less strong. We can't actually cope with things. So create your own little environment there within the circumstances that you're having to face. And even if you're in a family situation and you can't get out of it, you can actually make plans for yourself. You know, you can connect with other people. You can actually plan, right, in a few, I'm going to educate myself, or I'm going to get to this situation. That will be my goal. And in doing that, you're actually modeling that for your children as well. You know, so you're role modeling it yourself and you are showing them that there is a recovery journey out of this. And I've seen it so many times. It is powerful, even if we have to be realistic and say at the very beginning, we feel we're broken. We feel we're broken and that we cannot move on, but it's not true. That's what our mind tells us, and it keeps us down. So tap into your power there. And even if you can't, you don't have it yourself, tap into someone else's until you find your own, because you will find it if you connect with other people.
That's another great advice you're giving us today. My last question will be related to practical advice. If you have to pick and choose one big piece of advice to your audience that would like to rise as resilient leaders, confident leaders, especially for women, what would it be? So the one single advice you would put forward. You have made so many great advice, so just the one you feel could be the first on top.
I think for myself, I went on a journey and it was read. I read everything, I studied everything, I tried to understand everything. So that would be my one bit of advice to start with, is to actually educate yourself about what is actually going on and what you maybe have never faced this type of trauma, but other people have. So try to find that. Find books about it if you've got nobody that you can talk to. If you have a phone, go on Google and actually put in trauma or put in whatever. There was a book, and this is one that I actually, I'm not affiliated with it in any way, but there was a book called, in fact, I did write it down. Let me just double check. It's called Trauma and Recovery, the Aftermath of Violence from Domestic Abuse to Political Terror. Now, it's done by Professor Judith Herman, and it was done in 1992. And it was one of the most profound books I ever read about trauma, and specifically for women and girls and the traumas that they face. And it was so eye-opening. And that was the start of a journey for me, was finding that. So that would be my bit of advice, really, is to really search for it and search for something that is going to help you and educate yourself. And it's unbelievable what that can do for you, because, we speak about the power of words. They can empower us. As the old saying goes, the pen is mightier than the sword. So, tap into that and use it. If you've got nothing else, you probably still could find a book to actually help yourself. Just simple things.
Simple but important and great advice. So if you pick and choose a really great one. And by the way, if you find a link for the book, don't hesitate to share it with us. We'll put it at the bottom of the podcast so people can find it and read it.
That would be lovely. I've done an e-learning course, and it was based on that book. It was so powerful, and it was her mentioning of women and girls. She was like, they're not aware of all this violence that's directed towards them, and how do you get through that? Oh, it was eye-opening for me. And I thought I knew a lot about domestic violence and But reading that book opened my eyes to another world.
That's great, great insights. We're close to the end, but if you'd like, we would want to give you a chance to talk about whether it's an initiative, a project, or some new things that are coming up in your life or in your project. So
Yeah.
with the group. So just give you this opportunity. Don't just go ahead and share that with us. We'll be
Okay,
definitely
I will
pleased to
do.
hear from that. Yeah.
One of the best things that has actually happened is we've done our peer training. So we've had women coming through and they've learned and become empowered themselves. They asked if they could volunteer with our organisation, and of course I said yes. They worked on placement with other people, trying to phone and give support to other women, and sometimes it was men as well. And what's lovely about that is they said to me, I want to come and just volunteer with your organisation, because if I can do this and help other people, then I want to. But the lovely thing is we happen to be in with a few other organisations for a public contract with a local council. And we won the contract, which meant we were then able to actually employ these peer workers. So now we have 4 of those women who've come through. I didn't even realise they would have a job at the end of it, but they're being able to take those skills. And the beauty of it is they came believing they were broken. And they've gone through this journey only a matter of a few months, and they've done placement with us, and now they're actually employed. I was just with them this morning and we were doing some team building and some development work, and they're just a joy. It doesn't even feel like work to be with them, because they're all so delighted to be able to share and work with other people in similar circumstances. So to me, that's the greatest joy of what we could do here. Apart from the fact that personally I am having my first grandchild in July, so my husband and I are quite delighted about that too. So that
Congratulations.
absolutely lovely. We're going to be grandparents, so we're delighted about that. But obviously the work, we're thrilled about that, because at the end of the day we want to, this organisation was not done just for me. When I did it, I'd gone through the trauma but didn't have the support. I want this organisation to be for other people. And so, I've got grandchildren coming up and I'll have other things to do, but I wanted it to be here to fill the gap for other families who were going through that. And we want it just to continue. So, that's what the future holds. And hopefully it'll be strong enough to be able to sustain that. But with the women that we've got, they will just do anything to be able to support other people, which is wonderful. Wonderful to have people like that around.
Absolutely wonderful. That's the word I would have chosen as well. Awesome and wonderful for sure. So Aisha, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I don't know if you have some closing remarks and things that you would like to add to this. Your great insights are always welcome, as you know.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Maggie, it was very inspiring to listen to you, and also it's very insightful. So I can listen all day. So thank you. And thank you for your work, especially for women and girls, and thereby to the society, to the world, because we need that kind of work so much, especially during these times more than ever.
Yeah.
So
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to have been able to share that, our work, because, it's so inspiring hearing other people and their journeys, and I think the world needs more of that, these lovely journeys that people have come on despite everything that's happened to them. They need to know that there is recovery there and they will get through it. We've got to believe that for them. And sometimes we just have to hold hope for them. And if we have to hold hope for a little while, that's okay, until they get to the point where they can hold hope for themselves.
It's a great message. Thank you. Thank you very much, Maggie, for all these great messages and insightful and big reflections that are important to us. Thanks also to our listener for being part of TEDxPlattsburgh, the endeavor to give voice to women, to youth, to diversity, to vulnerable people on the way towards a sustainable future, a future for all. So thank you very much and stay tuned. We'll continue to have our podcast series going on in the near future. Thanks. Thanks all.